다시 한번 그 워크숍에 참석해 주신 여러분 환영합니다. 특히 오늘 워크숍을 개최할 수 있도록 도와주신 한국인권재단의 안성원님께 감사를 드립니다. 여러분들이 잘 아시는 것처럼 과거에 전통적으로 인권 보호 의무는 국가에게 있었습니다. 그런데 광주에서 2011년에 이 인권 포럼을 처음 시작했죠. 그때 결국에는 지방정부와 지역사회의 역할, 인권 보호의 부분에 있어서 그러한 부분에 있어서 광주와 다른 세계 인권 도시들이 목소리를 내기 시작을 했습니다. 그러한 성과들의 결과물로 지난해 제30차 UN 인권 이사회에서는 지방정부와 인권 최종 보고서가 채택이 됐습니다. 이 자리에 계신 여러분들의 노고가 있었기 때문에 가능한 일이라고 생각합니다. 오늘 워크숍에서는 여기에서 더 나아가서 지방정부와 인권 가이드라인을 논의하기 위해서 이 자리에 모였습니다. 그래서 이번 워크숍을 통해서 가이드라인이 만들어지고 그것을 통해서 지역사회와 전세계 지방정부가 인권 정책들을 좀 더 구체적이고 세계적으로 할 수 있는 어떤 비전을 마련하는 계기가 되기를 바랍니다. 끝으로 참석하시는 분들께 제가 호스트니까 간단하게 두 가지 프로그램에 대해서 홍보 말씀드리겠습니다. 내일 오후 1시부터 4시까지 바로 한층 위에 있는 컨퍼런스 홀 A에서 UCLG CISDP 회의가 개최가 됩니다. 그래서 지방 정부의 어떤 인권 정책 그리고 같이 협력하는 방안에 대해서 논의를 하게 되는데요. 가급적이면 참석하셔가지고 여러분들의 좋은 의견 나눠주시면 될 것 같습니다. 두 번째로는 내일 같은 날 오후 5시부터 7시까지 컨퍼런스 B입니다. 컨퍼런스 B에서 도시 정책 특별 세션이 있습니다. 저희 광주가 실험하고 있는 인권 모델에 대해서 간단하게 소개를 하는 자리인데요. 첫 번째로 자발적인 마을 공동체에 대한 지원에 대한 어떤 것들을 소개하고 있는데요. 광주는 지금 작년 대비 한 400개가 넘는 마을에 대해서 지원을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 확대된 민주주의에 대한 어떤 실험들을 하고 있고요. 두 번째로는 광주형 일자리 모델에 대해서 간단하게 소개를 하려고 합니다. 광주형 일자리라는 것은 노동자들에게 적정한 임금을 주고 노와 사가 경영에 참여해서 시와 시민들이 회사의 주주가 돼서 이러한 대타협을 통한 안정적인 일자리 창출의 어떤 모델입니다. 그래서 다행히도 이번 달에 정부의 국가사업으로 지정이 돼서 약 3천억 원이 되는 정부의 지원을 받게 됐습니다. 그래서 그러한 새로운 실험이, 광주의 실험이 성공을 한다면 어떤 경제 민주주의의 또 아시아 지역에서 새로운 모델이 될 것이라고 생각합니다. 그래서 그러한 광주의 어떤 새로운 어떤 시도들에 대해서 또 소개하는 자리가 있을 예정이니 많은 관심 부탁드립니다. 이상입니다.
Thank you. Could you please say how much is the budget from national government to your project?
지금 3천억 원을 지원 이게
How many years? How many years?
내일 한번에
Tomorrow. Okay. I couldn't believe when you said 3,000 Korean billion. How much US dollar?
I can't think of that.
The 10 billion, right? 1 billion. The US dollar.
30 million. 30 million.
30 million.
30 million.
US dollar. We are all confused. Sorry. Anyway, so a lot of money. So now the national government is now reviewing this project in Gwangju to promote human rights village. You know, so if there is approved, it will be a lot of money. So almost 1 billion US dollar, which is incredible amount of money. 3 billion.
방주형 이건 일자리 자본주의
일자리. Okay, yeah, sorry. So I was very happy, to hear because national governments are really interested in this type of human rights city and also the decent work compact, right? Okay, thank you. May I invite Professor Son Chang-no to give us a short welcome?
Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Chang-no So. I'm a professor at Korea University, and I've been working for Human Rights Council since 2014 as a member of Human Rights Council Advisory Committee. When I became the member of Advisory Committee, the first the mandate I had was local governments and human rights. So I immediately became a member of drafting committee, and I participated in finalizing the document. And I also participated last year in the Human Rights Experts Workshop here. And also one of my colleagues, another member of this very committee came, and this workshop actually had greatly contributed to the finalizing our report. So without the efforts of the Korea Human Rights Foundation and the City of Gwangju, this report would not have completed. And another good news is we are going to have another mission. I just heard from the Human Rights Council that 33rd Human Rights Council, which is beginning in September this year, they will make a decision to give advisory committee to provide another document which will discuss human rights guidelines for local governments. So most likely they will have it. So our work will start in February next year. So I think this workshop is extremely important for me, not only for me, but for everybody working for the local governments and human rights. And I'm very happy that we are going to have another mandate. And another thing I want to mention is I'm going to Geneva next month for 17th Advisory Committee. And another mandate that I have to be in charge is the regional human rights arrangements for promotion and protection of human rights. So as we know, in Asia, we don't have the regional human rights protection mechanisms. And it is going to be a great opportunity to think about how to make the regional arrangements and sub-regional arrangements, how to cooperate among the states, civil societies, and local governments also. So I think local governments issues are also related to the regional arrangements of human rights. So it is so exciting to have both assignments myself, because both assignments, I'm very much interested in this issue, and I hope everybody here can help us making good documents in following years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much for very good news from Geneva. I'm very excited at the news that Human Rights Council continue to work on these issues, and also especially new agenda, the Human Rights Advisory Committee on Regional Human Rights Mechanism. I see a lot of people here who have also a lot of expertise on this issue, especially Morton. You have a lot to say, I guess, on this issue later on. Okay, so let me briefly introduce the program. So as you see in the program book, page 7, there is a short concept note. I believe you have read before you came. Just summarize once again, as Kim Soo-ha said, this is a 6th World Human Rights Cities Forum, but the 3rd expert workshop on local government and human rights. Why 3rd? Because year 2004, as you can see in the program book, can you go to the last page of program book, page 151 page. You will see the Gwangju Guiding Principle for Human Rights City, adopted 17th of May 2014. So first expert workshop was held to prepare for this guiding principle. Page 151. But title is the guiding principle for human rights city. But thanks to Gwangju initiative, this concept of human rights city is becoming very popular in Asia, in Korea, but now Indonesia and a bit Philippines. But still in UN, it's a very new concept. Human rights city is a new concept. That's why Advisory Committee recommended instead of human rights city, use more general terms, local government and human rights, so that we can include local government in the rural area. Okay, so 2014, this was developed as a guiding principle for human rights. It's more domestic, and there are some countries where human rights city concepts are popular. So now the new mandate is how to develop further based on this one, transform that into local government and human rights. That's why second session, our task is to brainstorming, okay, which one we can take from this one, which one we need to add more, So it's kind of like preparatory work for the future task of the advisory committee. So now we are all advisors to advisory committee, informally.
You're participating in making a
We are making substantive contribution to the work of advisory committee. Without title, advisory committee. This is our job. So that's why it's called the expert. See, the first one was 2014, 15, and this is the third one. Okay. So these are second session. And then back to page 7 of concept notes. Page 7. You will see the paragraph 78 in the box. So there are several interesting recommendations from the report prepared by advisory committee. Let's go to the full report. You can find page 133. Can you go to 133? 133. The title is Role of Local Government in the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights. Final report of UN Human Rights Council Advisory Committee, which Professor So just mentioned. If you look at next page, 134, you can see the table of contents. And then chapter 10 is conclusions and recommendations. So in this report, there's a chapter, I think 7, where there's best practices. A lot of the cases were mentioned in this report, particularly in Korea. The Gwangju was mentioned as one of the pioneers of this human rights city, and also Seoul, and then Seongbuk and others, because Korea was, there are many interesting development in Korea. They were introduced in this report. So let's go to the conclusions and recommendations. There's a page 147. There are very interesting recommendations. For instance, paragraph 73 mention about UCLG, role of UCLG. And then 78, the last one, 78, and also 77 also very important. But now the recommendation is how local government can participate in international human rights mechanisms like UPR and trade equality, and also implementation of recommendation to make it real, the universal. So 78 is the one we are going to discuss today. There is a need to develop guiding principle for local government and human rights. This is clear mandate. So recommendation is next step is how to develop guiding principle, because there are a lot of questions and requests from many groups how to develop human rights city, how to integrate human rights into local government. That's why based on this report, next step is to develop guiding principles so that they can be used for training of trainers or those who want to really develop human rights city in different countries. Okay, that's why we are going to discuss this one. And also the paragraph 3 of the concept notes, back to page 7. And there will be, I think, informal discussion among Asian participants to discuss the need to develop a network among NGOs and national human institutions, how to move forward this agenda, human rights city. But in Asia, as you know, not every country, this human rights city concept is popular because usually the Mongolia, South Korea, Indonesia, Philippines, because these four countries, they have a full-fledged democracy, which means local democracy, local election, but not other countries. That's why unless we have a local election, this human rights city concept is not really well received by local politicians. That's why we need to promote local democracy at the same time human rights city. That's why idea is whether local democracy and human rights city together, so that we can promote this idea of human rights city in the Asian context. That was the idea. So there will be an informal discussion today or tomorrow about the need to create a kind of informal network together with the Gwangju. Okay. So as I said, this is organized by the Korea Human Rights Foundation Asia Democracy Network. It is a network of regional NGOs. You can find the organizer brochure in the back. So this is a network of the human rights NGO, election monitoring, and freedom of expression, and then peace and development. So we want to also promote this one as a agenda of local democracy together with the national democracy. That's why this is organized by Korea Human Rights Foundation ADN with the help of Gwangju. So this is a whole-day workshop. Let's look at the program. Session 1, immediately after this introduction, we have a future of human rights city challenges and opportunities, where we are going to discuss this UN final report and also recommendations. So we have two presentations. Professor Chadu, who has been with us from the beginning, so he knows all the history of this World Human Rights Cities Forum, and also from his own experience in Harvard University, he has seen what's happening globally. So he will help us look at human rights city in the global context. And also, second speaker, we have Karen Gomez from Philippine Human Rights Commission, who is also Philippine contact and also role of Human Rights Commission in these issues. And then we go around to have a general panel discussion. Okay, this is session 1. And then we have a lunch. I think by that time we will go all hungry. So we have a lunch in this building, right? In this building. The other building, so around this compound. This is the first time we are having meeting in this building, This is a new one, so I'm also a bit lost. So anyway, so we have around this compound, we have a lunch. We come back, then discuss concretely drafting guiding principle of local government human rights. So we go around once again. So this is not formal academic conference, it's a more brainstorming style, so that we can collect all the ideas. So some of them will go into the Human Rights Council Advisory Committee, and also some of them we will continue, in our way in Asia. And then after this afternoon session, we'll go to opening ceremony of the World Human Rights Cities Forum, which will take place in this building, right, in compound, right, in this compound. Everything is in this compound. Okay, and then we follow the general program. So tomorrow we will go into all different programs, right? So today's this workshop is finishing today, but tomorrow you are free to attend any different meetings and informal consultation. Okay. So among participants, now it's time to introduce. We go around. So there was some communication challenges. So some of you did not have a name card. I hope now you have all name card. Those want to sit in the front line. Okay. So, but your names are not printed in the booklet. So I want to invite you to introduce yourself. Let's start from here. Go this way, so that we know who is who, especially who are not in the program.
I'm Charlie Clemens from the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy at Harvard University.
Good morning, I'm Karen Gomez-Lupit. I'm Commissioner of the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines.
I am Magali Fricodet from United Cities and Local Government Committee on Social Inclusion, Participatory Democracy and Human Rights.
Good morning, my name is Jeff Plantilla from the Asia Pacific Human Rights Information Center.
Good morning, my name is Mugianto from the International NGO Forum on Indonesian Development, in charge of Human Rights and Democracy Program.
Good morning, I am Rose Trajano from the Philippine Alliance of Human Rights Advocates.
Good morning. My name is Jyoti Singera, and I'm from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva. And I am heading a section on economic and social issues.
Good morning. I'm Morgan Kierom. I'm a director of the Raoul Wallenberg Institute in Lund, Sweden. And we have just entered into a collaboration with the Association of Swedish Municipalities and Regions to develop human rights cities and regions in Sweden. Before I took up the post in Sweden, I was heading the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights in Vienna, where we also back in 2008-9 started work on the joint governance in the human rights area. Thank you.
Morning. I'm Bashir Kanute, working at ENDA. ENDA is Environmental Development and Action in the Third World, also leading International Observatory of Participatory Democracy in Africa.
Good morning, I'm Roy Martinez. I'm head of the Citizenship Department of Barcelona City Council.
네, 반갑습니다. 저는 노현수라고 하고요. 한국방송통신대학에서 법학부에 강사로 있습니다. 만나서 반갑습니다.
Good morning. My name is Chang Young-Sang. I'm a law school professor of Jeonbuk National University, and also I'm working as a committee member of Human Rights Commission of local government. It's Jeollabuk, it's nearby, just next to the province of Japan. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues and friends. My name is Hyung-Sik Shin. I am working at the Korea Democracy Foundation as the director of the Institute for Korean Democracy. Nice to meet you.
Good morning. My name is Jung-Seok Kim. I'm working at Department of Sociology, Gyeongsang National University. I used to be in charge of Institute of Human Rights at my university. Thank you.
Okay. So especially I want to acknowledge Professor Kim Jung-seok is the first person in South Korea who invented the concept of human rights city and promoted from the beginning. So the last 10 years, almost more than 10 years ago, But this idea of human rights city materialized in Gwangju, not in his own city. Okay. So can you also go around the second line? I think one of the human rights principles is inclusiveness. Right? So we have to invite all to.
혹시
마이크 좀 이렇게.
여기 핸드마이크나 이런 거 있을까요?
Could you please stand up? 한국말이나 간단히 자기 이름과 좀 소개 좀 해주세요. 예, 잘 소개하셔야죠.
Thank you very much. My name is Kim Chuno, and I work with volunteer and the GIC. GIC means International, let's see, Gwangju Center, and I'm volunteer out there.
Okay.
And I wish, and everybody have a good first time visit my hometown, Gwangju Metropolitan City, to all of you. And have a great day. Have a great time while staying in Gwangju, okay?
Thank you. There are a lot of volunteers from the Gwangju city who help us to organize all this event. Thank you once again. Please.
Yeah, hello, good morning. My name is Mazohir Akbari, and I'm a student of Changwon National University in Business Administration. Also a member of GRC, and also a volunteer of Asia Culture Center. And I'm from Afghanistan. Nice to meet you.
Okay, welcome. Yes.
Hello everyone, my name is Jonathan Brenner from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I just graduated law school, so I'm representing the Student Association for Human Rights, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
안녕하세요. 만나서 반갑습니다. 저 이름은 스티븐입니다. And I come on behalf of the government of Mexico City. I'm the coordinator of advisors for the Secretary of Social Development. So nice to meet you all.
Welcome.
Such a proceeded Korean.
예, 안녕하십니까. 저는
사단법인 제주 외국인 평화공동체 한용길입니다. 반갑습니다.
Good morning to all. I'm José Tellez. I'm first deputy mayor from Badalona City Council inside the Barcelona metropolitan area.
안녕하세요. 유재형이라고 합니다. 저는 서울시에서 인권 침해 조사 구제 업무를 담당하고 있습니다. 반갑습니다.
네, 반갑습니다. 저는 한국 미혼모 지원 네트워크의 대표를 맡고 있는 박영미라고 합니다.
please.
Good morning. My name is Thomas Kokobe from Japan. I manage the social enterprise.
Good morning. My name is Sue. I'm from the Asian Democracy Network. Nice to meet you.
안녕하세요. 저는 한국인권재단 사국장을 맡고 있는 고선영이라고 합니다. 반갑습니다.
Good morning. My name is Bipin Malaya from India. I'm representing the first Indian urban local governance from New Delhi.
안녕하세요. 저는 광명시에 있는 광명 시민인권센터장 박경옥이라고 합니다. 지방정부 인권 가이드라인이라고 해서 궁금해서 어떤 형태로 움직이는지 궁금하고 그 책을 보면서 현상하고 그 실제 여기서 나오는 그 논문에 대한 이해가 좀 차이가 많이 있는 것 같아서 그거에 대해서 좀 궁금해서 좀 더 어떻게 자세하게 이야기하는지 좀 듣고 싶었고요. 하나 좀 양해를 부탁드리는 게 지금 저는 영어를 전혀 못하기 때문에 좀 천천히 좀 하셔야 될 것 같은 게 너무 이렇게 템포가 안 맞습니다. 그래서 조금 천천히 말씀해 주시면 이해를 좀 이해가 되게 들을 수 있을 것 같습니다.
예, 고맙습니다. Okay, there's a special request. Speak slowly so that everybody can understand, participate. This is also important human right? Okay, thank you for your cooperation. So, see two more persons who just came in. Okay, there's one more friend. And then, yeah.
Good morning. My name is Benedict Kimil, the mayor of Inhamban City, Mozambique.
Wow, from Mozambique. Okay, we have one more friend here. Will you please introduce? Stand up and you can speak.
My name is Guilhem. I work with Magali in the Committee on Social Inclusion, Participatory Democracy and Human Rights.
Initiative. Okay, good. So we will circulate the paper so that you can put down your name who are not printed here. Okay, so we will share later the name card, the list, so for future communication. So more or less everyone introduced. So are you clear about what is going to happen, what we are supposed to do together? It's okay, right? So and then let's give a big hands to everybody. And then now I pass the microphone to Professor Chano and then two keynote speakers.
Okay. So thank you very much for giving me the chance to be a chair of this session. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Charlie Clement to speak 20 minutes.
I think you're supposed to be
Please come. Okay.
So it's an honor for me to give one of the keynote addresses today. I want to thank Anselmo Lee and other organizers of this global forum. I've had the privilege of attending the forum on several occasions, and in each instance, I've been inspired by the people I meet, the stories of courage and creativity and perseverance that I hear, and the steady growth of this Gwangju-inspired movement. The organizers had no way of knowing this, but Kim Dae-jung is one of my human rights heroes. I had the privilege of meeting him in Washington, D.C. soon after his death sentence was commuted in about 1982, when he was exiled to the United States. Despite being kidnapped and almost murdered, despite awaiting execution for a number of years for his alleged role in the May 18th movement, all he could talk about at the time was returning to Korea. As I look back on my life, I will always consider myself a fortunate person for having met Kim Dae-jung and later his widow, Madam Lee Hui-ho, here 2 years ago in the center named in his memory. The first assignment from Anselmo and the organizers was to discuss the emerging trends and challenges to the human rights city globally and in my own country. First, I'll discuss those trends and challenges which are similar globally and in the U.S., followed by a conversation of those that differ. I believe many places in the world are experiencing similar effects from a resurgence of political nationalism and religious fundamentalism, both of which pose threats to the realization of human rights, especially those of immigrants and refugees. The recent Brexit vote is but one example. Presidential candidate Donald Trump's populist campaign are but cross-Atlantic echoes of some of the same resentments and xenophobic slogans heard in the UK during the Leave campaign. Foreigners are taking our jobs and threaten our well-being. These immigrants have values and cultures alien to our own, and many of them are criminals living on the welfare we pay for. Breaking the bureaucratic shackles of Brussels and the EU will restore the greatness of Great Britain. Those are but three often repeated slogans we've heard. Donald Trump's America First slogan is a reminder of the hundreds of thousands of Americans who supported America First Committee in 1940, which advocated against U.S. involvement in World War II. It calls to mind the unvarnished anti-Semitism of some of the most prominent members of that committee and their praise for the economic policies of Adolf Hitler, who had already banned Jews from public sector jobs, confiscated their businesses, and was stealing their personal assets as they were beginning to be locked up in the early concentration camps. Whether it's emerging fascism in Hungary, Austria, Turkey, Russia, or Donald Trump's bigoted and nostalgic notion to make America great again by ending our role in multilateral coalitions like NATO, the UN and anti-nuclear pacts like that of Japan, those trends are provoking conversations around the world about a revival of fascism, generally defined as a governmental system that asserts complete power and emphasizes aggressive nationalism and often racism. They are a threat to what we stand for in this World Human Rights Cities movement. It's not merely people in the UK and the US making these comparisons. President Enrique Peña Nieto of Mexico criticized Mr. Trump's plans to build a wall on the border and to bar Muslims from entering the United States, saying, quote, "That's the way Mussolini arrived and the way Hitler arrived," end quote. Fueling both religious fundamentalism, as reflected in ISIL and ISIS, as well as the popular support for political authoritarianism, is a force that is found in the US and globally: economic stagnation. I think if we examine the anger generated by this phenomenon, we'll have to conclude that a lot of it stems from free trade agreements that benefits corporations, but lead to job losses of ordinary citizens in the North, and often marginalize low-pay jobs in the South. A lot of the energy generated by Trump's campaign and the Brexit referendum is fueled by anger of people whose economic lives and futures are stalled or in decline. Muslim youth throughout the Middle East and other parts of the world turn to radical Islam and such acts as suicide bombings as a way to give their lives meaning, because often, despite college degrees, the future they see is bleak at best and too often filled with desperation. Anger and hopelessness arise from the stagnation of people's lives, whether in the US, the UK, or the Middle East. These are trends that make our work as human rights activists more challenging because they fuel fears of terrorism. At the same time, they strengthen national security regimes. Economic stagnation makes our work as human rights activists more challenging as national, regional, and municipal budgets shrink. When difficult decisions have to be made, they are often made with a political calculus in relation to those least able to raise their voices in protest: the homeless, the poor, the disabled, the elderly, indigenous communities, and those in need of mental health services. In other words, on the backs of the most marginalized. Cutting back on social services and social safety nets essential for survival and human dignity undermine the rights to health, food, housing, and education. It makes it harder for human rights cities to model the values we are attempting to promote. This stagnation, which began as an economic tidal wave in 2008, was caused by another kind of fundamentalism, so-called market fundamentalism, a term coined by Nobel economist Alfred Stiglitz. He uses the term to describe the belief that unfettered pursuit of self-interest through self-regulating markets would ensure economic prosperity by leading to the most efficient allocation of resources. As described by the Center for Economic and Social Justice, quote, any form of government action, including the regulation of private businesses and redistribution of wealth, was seen as interference with the working of the market mechanism and discouraged on the assumption that this would reduce rather than increase aggregate social welfare. These beliefs, which dominated international economic policymaking throughout the 1980s and 1990s, supported the promotion of a policy package of liberalization, deregulation, and privatization of the Washington Consensus by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. This meant effectively rolling back the state in the belief that this would benefit global economic growth and, by extension, all of the world's people. Another trend that is common to both the United States and around the world, which also undermines our efforts, is militarism and the spending it generates. A 20-year veteran of the CIA stated the case succinctly when he said, quote, "The United States lacks a strategic vision for a world without an enemy, and it continues to spend far more on defense, homeland security, and intelligence than the rest of the world combined. We are the only nation in the world that deploys its military primarily to support foreign policy rather than defend our borders and people. U.S. corporations dominate the sales of military equipment, selling extremely sophisticated weapons to countries like Saudi Arabia that have the hard currency to pay for them but lack the skill to use them. We have more than 700 military bases and facilities around the world. Few other countries have any. We can deploy 11 aircraft carriers. Among our rivals, only China even plans to deploy one, and that is a revamped Ukrainian aircraft carrier, a carryover from the ancient Soviet inventor. In most countries, including the U.S., military budgets are sacrosanct and either not debatable because they are justified as part of the anti-terrorism or national security strategy, or obscured by black budgets not accessible to anyone without a security clearance. Another trend shared both in the U.S. and globally is a general backlash against the entire notion of human rights, which has come from resurgent Islam, from within the West itself, and from East Asia. The claim is that there is a Western bias which ignores or undermines the cultural differences that exist between societies in different parts of the world, embedded within the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and extending to the entire global human rights regime. But this critique doesn't just originate abroad. It has been argued by respected organizations such as the American Anthropological Association and articulated by intellectuals such as my colleague at Harvard, Professor Michael Ignatieff. He claims, quote, "The West now masks its own will to power in the impartial, universalizing language of human rights and seeks to impose its own narrow agenda on a plethora of world cultures that do not actually share the West's concept of individuality, selfhood, agency, or freedom," end quote. More recently, authoritarian regimes such as Venezuela under Chavez and Maduro, Russia under Putin, Hungary under Orban have attacked human rights as undermining widely accepted norms of international relations, such as the principles of sovereignty or non-interference in the affairs of other countries. The failure of the U.S. Senate to muster the 66 votes needed to ratify the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2012 reflects a similar domestic trend. Opposition was organized in part on the basis that the CRPD could mean that every homeowner could be required to make their own home fully accessible to those with disabilities, as well as it would, quote, "officially sanction the UN's ongoing supervisory role over numerous aspects of American life," end quote. For similar arguments of interference with its sovereignty, the U.S. remains only one of 3 countries in the world that has not ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child. These are not new currents in the U.S. In 1950, Frank Holman, then president of the American Bar Association, led an effort to amend the United States Constitution to limit the power of treaties, saying that the UDHR would promote state socialism, if not communism, throughout the world, end quote. So it's not only authoritarian regimes that push back against human rights. Another alarming trend has been the persecution of the poor and marginalized across the U.S. The most persistent form has been criminalization of the homeless, wherein people are forced to perform life-sustaining activities in public spaces, sleeping, eating, resting, and relieving themselves, or regularly being cited and fined or arrested and jailed. They are unable to pay their hefty fines, and then a warrant is issued for their arrest. They develop police records. This makes it hard for them to get jobs or to rent a room or a small apartment. In Hungary, fines totaling $125,000 were levied against the homeless before the Hungarian Constitutional Court annulled their homelessness ordinance because it violated their own constitution's requirement to protect the right to human dignity and property. The Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, Magdalena Sepulveda, criticized the subsequent amendment to the fundamental law, that's what they call their constitution, which was rushed through Parliament saying, quote, it institutionalizes the criminalization of the homelessness and enshrines discrimination against and stigmatization of homeless persons. This trend is another reflection of the dangerously increasing gap seen worldwide between haves and have-nots. We see a similar trend with the estimated 2 million people with serious mental illnesses who are jailed each year in the United States. Almost 3/4 of those persons with mental illnesses tend to stay in jail longer, and upon release are at a higher risk of returning to incarceration than those with ordinary illnesses. All of this results in a staggering human toll and cost to taxpayers. Almost 2/3 of those individuals also have concurring drug or alcohol use disorders for which they are unable to obtain treatment. Often people with serious mental illnesses are incarcerated for minor offenses when they would be better served in the community, and though jails have a constitutional mandate to treat mental illness of their inmates, they are often ill-prepared to meet their needs or even to assess what those needs might be. It's been shown that jails spend 2 to 3 times more money on adults with mental illnesses than on those without those needs, yet they often do not see a return on those investments in terms of improved public safety or health of those individuals. For individuals with mental illnesses, contact with the criminal justice system often starts a cycle of arrest, incarceration, release, and rearrest that can prove nearly insurmountable challenges to the recovery as they face increasingly serious charges or fail to comply with conditions of release. Prisons become the institutions, homes for these individuals. Most criminal justice and community-based treatment personnel agree that correction environments are poor settings for individuals with mental illness. Though some states and localities have made tremendous efforts to address these problems, they're often thwarted by significant obstacles, including inadequate data to inform public policy changes, minimal resources, and a lack of coordination between criminal justice and mental health, substance use treatment, and other agencies. This trend has been accelerated both in the U.S. and worldwide with the deinstitutionalization of the mentally ill as cost-cutting measures without providing necessary resources for community-based treatment options. There are other imminent challenges to our realization of human rights. Cities, having worked for an issue for a decade, I believe the human right to water and sanitation is increasingly a threat to human rights cities in both the North and South. Many of you may have read about the city in Flint, Michigan, where the residents turned on their taps and the water emerged brown and foul-smelling. It took the governor and his staff 17 months to respond, and in the interim, thousands of children were harmed by dangerously high levels of lead. Before the crisis with lead contamination in Flint, more than 50,000 families in Detroit had their water abruptly cut off. In congressional testimony, Alice Jennings, a Detroit-based lawyer, stated, quote, not having water service immediately makes a home uninhabitable under Detroit ordinances. Children under state law can be immediately taken from their parents or family and placed in protective services. Fear, humiliation, and embarrassment are not uncommon where water has been shut off for non-payment, end quote. In an earlier hearing before a U.S. bankruptcy judge, Director of Detroit Water and Sewage Department, Sue McCormick, stated that as soon as our temperatures rise above freezing, the department regularly resumes cutoffs. McCormick acknowledged under cross-examination that the Detroit Water Department orders shutoffs without warning residents in advance and without checking first to determine whether children, the elderly, or disabled persons were present in the homes slated for shutoffs. Even though such warnings and checks are mandated by the department's own rules, last year in Philadelphia, Councilwoman Kenyatta Sanchez affirmed that human rights are a concern for local government, announcing city council approval of legislation to improve access to affordable water for members of Philadelphia low-income communities. She announced, or she quoted the UN human rights expert saying, it is contrary to human rights to disconnect water from people who simply do not have the means to pay their bills, end quote. A young Hispanic girl who had traveled the Mexican border in Texas to the state capital of Austin to testify about the lack of running water in her community said, I have never been embarrassed about being poor. It's our family's daily bread. But when I have to go to school for a week without being able to bathe or wash my hair because there's not enough water, it makes me feel ashamed, end quote. Millions of people around the world today, many of them in cities, are threatened by the loss of not only their dignity by the lack of clean water and sanitation, but the loss of their health and even life itself. The final trend I will mention that exists both in the United States and globally that is challenging the realization of human rights cities is the epidemic of violence against women that generally goes unrecognized and around which there is too much silence. Violence against women is by far the most widespread human rights abuse on earth, and it affects everyone, everywhere. Violence against women and girls has a devastating impact on the survivor, all of those close to her, the community, and ultimately the nation. 1 in 3 women worldwide will be a survivor. Whether in war or in peace, violence against women is a threat to the safety and well-being of billions around the globe. More than 600 million women live in nations where there's no domestic violence law. 3/4 of the world, that means their husband can rape them. 3/4 of the world's nations give husbands a rape pass, such that violating their wives is legal. It is surprising that women's rights groups received only 1% of human rights funding worldwide. Not really. The only binding international treaty that focuses on women, CEDAW, does not even contain the word violence. At the time of its drafting, violence against women was considered a domestic matter, but it is a profound matter of public policy that is seldom debated in part because its victims are silenced by their shame, by indifference to their plight, and too often persecution if they dare bring it to the light of day. I believe this is one of the most significant obstacles to our dreams of human rights cities, both in the U.S. and globally. So those are some of the challenges. I don't see the glass as half empty. I see it as half full, but I'm running out of time a little bit. My comments are all written here. So I just want to focus briefly on the U.S. since there's no other panelists here from the United States. I think that one of the most important issues, and I'm skipping to page 31 in the manual here, one of the most important institutional resources in building the capacity of state and local governments to implement human rights at the local level and advocate for federal support and coordination is the Human Rights Institute at Columbia University Law School in New York City. It chairs the state and local working group, part of the Bringing Human Rights Home Lawyers Network, and the Human Rights Home Hurrah campaign. The Bringing Human Rights Home Network now incorporates more than 800 lawyers in the U.S., both in private practice, academia, and public interest law firms in 37 states. It includes more than 200 international, regional, and domestic NGOs. It collaborates closely with the UN Human Rights Network, especially during treaty reviews and universal periodic review. As an example of the work, the Human Rights and the U.S. Project of HRA at Columbia, in its recent collaboration with Mayor William Bell of Birmingham, there was a day-long conference marking the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday March on Selma during the Civil Rights Movement. Panels at Birmingham dialogue focused on 5 human rights issues: social justice, education, immigration, homelessness, poverty, as well as marriage equality. It offered opportunities for advocates, community members, and federal and local government officials to discuss challenges, share their perspectives on successful local policies and programs, and identify strategies for improvement. While there are a few U.S. municipalities declaring themselves to be human rights cities, we do see more and more framing of problems in the human rights language. In closing, I want to focus some attention on Eugene, Oregon, which since 2007 has been attempting to implement human rights principles in its own role as a municipal duty bearer in collaboration with its citizens-led Human Rights Commission. More than any other city in the U.S., it has wrestled with how to internalize human rights principles and standards into the operation of all city departments. Compared to other cities that passed human rights resolutions in name, or even have human rights commissions, the Eugene Human Rights Project is a remarkable and comprehensive undertaking. Many people involved with it, citizens and city employees, would insist it is imperfect but still a work in progress. Nevertheless, it offers insights and wisdom to other municipalities that aspire to become human rights cities. The bold experiment is described in a chapter of a book just published last month by Cambridge University Press, Global Urban Justice, The Rise of Human Rights Cities, which I recommend to everyone here. The chapter about Eugene, written by Ken Newbeck, who attended this conference 4 years ago, is called In a State of Becoming a Human Rights City. Newbeck himself, who serves on the Eugene Human Rights Commission, details some features of their Human Rights Project. The framework calls on the city organization and elected officials to proactively identify and seek solutions to human rights problems and issues, address human rights violations even when those violations can be considered unintentional, establish mechanisms to ensure active public participation in human rights problems, identification and establishing solutions, be transparent and open about all government decision bearing on people's lives, be publicly accountable for progress in remedying human rights problems, by timetables, benchmarks, and appropriate measures, and finally to provide education to all residents about their human rights and how they can seek to redress violations. The city also provides periodic training to city managers as well as employees about how to think about their duties from a human rights perspective. For the first time in the United States, the city is attempting to manage itself from strategic planning to budgeting to providing daily services to its citizens within a context of human rights. The mayor of Eugene, Kitty Piercy, who in 2010 was named by the prestigious Nation magazine as America's most valuable local official, recently stepped down after 12 years in office. The candidate who promised to continue this remarkable human rights experiment was elected in a contested race. So despite imperfections, some of which Newbeck describes, the rights holders of Eugene and citizens must believe that practice makes perfect and want to continue practicing. I'd like to close with some words from the Talmud, which have sustained me through some difficult moments in my 40 years of human rights practice. I hope they may be helpful to you as well. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. Thank you, Anselmo and the Planning Committee.
Thank you so much, Charlie. It's a great presentation, and I'm sorry I had to stop you, but it's all printed now, so people can read. He sketched out the negative aspects of the global leaders, United States, and the difficulties of facing with the new challenges in terms of human rights. And I think he laid out the importance of the human rights cities in responding to those negative aspects. And lastly, he showed a good example of Eugene. I will read this book. I think it's a very interesting case. So thank you very much. Then next, I would like to invite you to make a 20 minutes presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm honored to be presenting to you the role of national human rights institutions in the implementation of the recommendations of the UN Human Rights Council report on local government and human rights. How do I do this? It's not working.
That worked.
Oh, thank you. My presentation will consist of 4 parts. Basically, by way of review, what NHRIs are, and the second part will be calling out some recommendations of the UNHRC report on local government and human rights. And then we give you some insights on the role of national human rights institutions vis-a-vis the recommendations, some emerging trends and challenges to the human rights city, which I will share in the last part. But all throughout my presentation, I will break it into giving you some examples in the Philippines on how the National Human Rights Institution looks at their role in shaping and making human rights cities. All right. So what are national human rights institutions? As you know, they are state bodies with a constitutional or legislative mandate to promote and protect human rights. They are part of the state apparatus and are funded by the state largely, but we are an independent body in government or in the bureaucracy. So NHRIs have to comply with the Paris Principles, which are called the cornerstone of national human rights protection systems, and they are increasingly, we serve as relay mechanisms or bridges between international human rights norms and the state and its implementation of human rights obligations. We also have this unique position that we want to tap and share with you. We do not resemble any other part of government, but we are a unique body in any government where we are present. As I've said, we are part of the state structure and are creatures of the law, and Paris Principles requires that NIs or NHRIs must have a constitutional or legislative basis. This is quite important. It's because we cannot be, we have to be somewhat a permanent body to be able to create that change and perform our roles as, let's say, watchdog of government. We come in with many names. Some say we're proveedors in South America, for instance, or ombudsmen in Nordic countries. In Asia, we're called commissions of human rights. We have a generally wide geographic reach across the nation, and this is quite important when we talk about replicating the concept of human rights cities. And in a recent UN Office WHRCF survey, most NHRIs cover the whole of the country or the country where they're from. And the general standard is that there can perhaps only be one national human rights per country, owing to the fact that it has to have the broadest mandate possible. But in a small number of cases, national human rights institutions also have extraterritorial jurisdiction. In the case of the Philippines, we do have a mandate to protect Filipinos abroad. So that, in a sense, is an extraterritorial jurisdiction. We also have, NHRIs enable states to meet their international responsibility to take all appropriate action to ensure that international obligations are implemented at the national level. So this is basically our anchor when we talk about human rights cities as well. So basic role of NHRIs is really promotion and protection of human rights. In the promotion aspect, creating a national culture of human rights where tolerance, equality, and mutual respect thrive. And in the promotion aspect is to helping identify and investigate human rights abuses, human rights violations to justice, and to provide a remedy and redress for victims. We are perhaps more well known in the Philippines on the human rights protection side. NHRI should also have a legally defined mandate to undertake these functions. In the Commission, we're primarily an investigative body, but we do have a mandate to promote a culture of human rights in the country as well, and also a direct mandate from the Constitution to monitor international human rights obligations. So we have some cross-cutting responsibilities and functions. But basically, what we do is advise government and the parliament. We also get to promote and protect the rights of specific groups. These are specific groups. Owing to the Paris principle of plurality, we do have protection and promotion programs relating to specific groups like women, migrant workers, persons with disabilities, and the like. Let me just call out the 8 recommendations from the UN Human Rights Council report. First, the civil society should be actively involved in human rights planning and implementation at the local level. Local public officials should keep ongoing dialogues with citizens and with civil society, and there has to be a well-developed channel for this communication and collaboration. Measures should be taken both nationally and internationally to strengthen civil society capacity to monitor and engage with local government. Outside large urban municipalities, civil society is often weak and has little experience of monitoring or cooperating with local government. International city networks such as the United Cities and local governments can play a key role, which I'm sure our colleague here will present later on. Central government is responsible to provide valuable information on human rights and their impact at the local level to local governments, and in making more practicable and more effective on the local level specific areas that are highly connected to the effective implementation of human rights at the local level should be identified. In this case, let me just give you some examples of this. Perhaps in the Commission, we have had developed the expertise for scanning the environment and producing human rights situationers in certain localities, and this certainly would be helpful in making sure that there is this there is an implementation of this particular recommendation. Let me just. It's not. let me just point out the view that was expounded earlier on. Human rights cities really aim to localize human rights and keep human rights alive in communities. So the Human Rights City, based on the Gwangju Declaration on Human Rights, defines it as both a local community and a social political process in the local context where human rights play a key role as the fundamental values and guiding principles of the local community. So these are the principles of a human rights city, which I won't belabor anymore, but let me just try to unpack what the right to the city means, which is essentially, and to quote one expert, is to invoke rights to the city means to claim some kind of shaping power over the process of urbanization, over ways in which our cities are made and remade, and to do so in a fundamental and radical way. And NHRIs can perhaps be better placed to ensure that these principles are kept alive in localities. So I now give you some insights on the role of NHRIs in this respect. As I've said, NHRIs are a bridge between civil society and local officials and national officials, etc. So this means that NHRIs, as I've said, have a unique position because we have the benefit of working across all sectors, as I've said, and we have partnered with various stakeholders on human rights promotion and protection. National institutions also have the advantage of being a state institution, but at the same time, consensus-building agents for human rights. I often say that perhaps this is just my interpretation, that NHRIs are actually hybrids between civil society organizations and state organizations. And I've often said that sometimes we are always in a hard place, located between a rock and a hard place. And I always tell our audience, be they from government or civil society, that you can choose where you will be or where you are, who you are, a hard place or a rock. NHRIs could also design programs and initiatives that engage civil society as a stakeholder in the process, in the human rights process, to ensure their active participation. And there are many programs by which we have done this. NHRIs also can create and convene open spaces for dialogues. This has been done through some programs that we have. For instance, my colleague here from the Philippines would know this. We have created, together with civil society and the security sector, what is called the Community-Based Dialogues Project, where we have come together in localities to discuss certain imminent human rights issues when it comes to security concerns, where areas where militarization is present because of presence of dissidents or rebel groups in the area. We have been able to, in this community dialogue, we have been able to create a safe space for communication and collaboration, and have created this venue for networking. This particular project, Community-Based Dialogues, was not really our creation. It was a creation of civil society groups who actually invited us to go down to the localities and discuss human rights issues that are close to the people in the area. With this, NHRIs can also ensure that local governments are part of the human rights protective system of the state. So NHRIs are also watchdog, and this is where perhaps we can get a more negative examples of how NHRIs can actually do its work. But going through this, NIs are essentially watchdogs in ensuring that valuable information on human rights and their impact at the local level are shared by the national government to the local, and vice versa, of course. One example of this would probably be calling out certain situations in cities where perhaps a mayor would institute draconian laws to implement certain ordinances. NHRIs could also monitor domestic implementation of international human rights commitments and in processes such as the UPR and engage local governments. We have again, in fact, joined hands with a presidential human rights committee, our counterpart in the executive, as well as a network of NGOs and civil society people's organizations. Our colleague is here representing the Philippine Alliance of Human Rights Advocates, and we have developed a tool for UPR in the UPR recommendations. Just to cite one example is one of the things that came out of our Universal Periodic Review was a praise that we have a very high literacy rate. But we all know that in that figure of about 92-93%, the 7% is still something that we need to look at. And we identified particular provinces and cities that are lagging behind that particular recommendation, and we gave that as an example of how we can localize the UPR recommendations. NHRIs could also look into specific vulnerable groups, as I've said, but at the same time take into account the role of local governments in promoting and protecting rights. We have examples of local ordinances, let's say on gender and development, local ordinances that promote a gender code or children's code is one of the examples by which we can give you in several of the cities. But it can also go and it can also have a backlash. Like for instance, in a city in south of Luzon, our main area, where there is a mayor who actually issued an executive order banning the distribution of reproductive health commodities in the area, despite national government giving them all the commodities. So this is one example of how not to be a human rights city. And we called them out. We went into a national inquiry on reproductive health, and the report will be coming out this end of July. NHRIs could also call the attention of national government to look into human rights situations, as I've said, in local government units. The current anti-drug campaign or the campaign or the war on drugs has actually created the opposite, again, example of a human rights city where you have a lot of killings done by local law enforcement agents, vigilante killings also against drug suspects as well. But you have one outstanding city mayor who has actually took it upon himself to create a parade of suspects out in the city so that suspected drug pushers and users will be shamed into not doing drugs anymore. And we called out that particular mayor and filed a case against him actually with the ombudsman. So this is just one case. Again, let me just reiterate the unique position of national human rights institutions. We are independent of the government of the day. That's why we can do this. And perhaps one of the things that we can take a look at, one of the indicators perhaps of a human rights city is a city commissioner on human rights, or a city, a mechanism of human rights where Paris principles are also translated into that particular mechanism that they will be creating. So this is an important aspect, I think, that we must be able to emphasize. Okay, some emerging trends and challenges to the human rights city. Of course, political, economic, and administrative, the biggest challenge, of course, is the lack of political will to be able to implement the tenets of a human rights city. Shortage in institutional capacity or resources, whether due to lack of political will. In some cases, even in the reproductive health example that I said, there was a Supreme Court decision in the Philippines that actually declared unconstitutional the mandatory provision of reproductive health implements by local government because of local government autonomy. So this has been made as an excuse by local governments to be able to carry out reproductive health services in their jurisdictions. Lack of adequate coordination between central and local governments, lack of information about the requirements resulting in the human rights, non-recognition of the role and contributions from civil society. Of course, in some areas, in many areas in the Philippines, human rights defenders are actually demonized. They are tagged, and so the credibility is diminished as well. Absence of human rights obligations in the priorities of donors and development agencies is one of the things that we want to take a look at. Okay. Some reflections, we can say that the prevailing notion that the duty bearer of human rights is the only national government. This is a challenge because we have to unpack what duty bearer means. And duty bearer does not only mean the national government, it refers to each and every perhaps government agent found in the smallest unit of governance in cities, municipalities, and even villages. Problems with urbanization such as management of housing, crimes, forced eviction, management of movements and creation of megacities also. Migration is really a problem because where jobs are, that's where people will go, and a whole host of problems of megacities come in. Other pressing issues in the Philippines is traffic and congestion that affect quality of life. There is a pending, we're awaiting a proposal from a senator and a House of Representatives asking Congress to give emergency powers just for traffic when they haven't been able to exercise much of their regulatory functions. So some of the above issues are depicted in the next slides. I'm not going to explain this anymore. A picture says 1,000 words, so these are the things that we are confronted with. Okay. As a last note, and in closing, allow me just to say that we emphasize, of course, our independent bridging role. And NHRIs can help contextualize issues on the ground in providing its expertise on the methodologies of the human rights-based approach in not only identifying duty bearers and claim holders, but also analyzing, understanding the relationship between the two, facilitating convening dialogues and setting goals to pursue and respond to human rights issues. So in behalf of the members of the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines, I thank you, specifically to Anselmo Lee, the Korean Human Rights Foundation and the Asia Development Network, for this opportunity of sharing with you today here in Gwangju, whose example as a human rights city we will bring home to the Philippines. Maraming salamat.
Okay, thank you so much, Karen. It was a great presentation. She basically talk about the role of NHRI. And also she mentioned the challenges, particularly the lack of political will. I think as the documents of the advisory committee mentioned, the lack of political will is a serious problem. But I also learned that national human rights institutions can do a particular role in promoting the human rights cities around the world. So thank you so much. And now we move on to the discussions. We have many people, not only people in the list, but also other participants. So I'd like to invite everybody in the room. There is a translation, simultaneous translation, so all the players can speak in Korean freely. So that means each discussant make a presentation short, maybe 5 to 7 minutes maximum, so that all the people can participate. This place is not just academic discussion, it's more practical discussion, so that you can tell your opinions, so you can share how can improve the human rights cities, and also for the following the guiding principles of advisory committee research. I hope you can contribute to what we can do about their documents. Okay, I will pass the microphone to the Magali Frikonen.
Yes, okay. Hello. Thank you very much. I am the coordinator of the Committee on Social Inclusion, Participatory Democracy and Human Rights of United Cities and Local Governments. So that have been mentioned quite a few times, I think, in the previous speeches. Sorry, I have not an intervention that is on the book. I will be more like spontaneous on that much, but I would like to tackle some the history of a committee in promoting human rights, the evolutions that we found, and also maybe some challenges for the future. But I would like to, before, thank a lot Gwangju City Hall, that is a co-president city of a committee, because as you said very well, Changrog, without political will, we would not be able to exist. So thanks to the cities like Barcelona, who is here also, like Gwangju, like Mexico City, who is represented also, and like Plaine Commune in Paris, Northern Periphery, that is coming this afternoon, we can exist thanks to the will of cities to promote human rights. Because, as you know, it depends too much on political wills and not that much on real effectivity of mechanism and judiciality of human rights for local government to commit themselves for promoting, fulfilling, and guaranteeing and protecting human rights at local level. So thanks to Gwangju, because I think these spaces are very important to improve the way we protect, promote, and fulfill human rights at local level. Thanks also to the Gwangju International Center. I think your presence in this organization as a civil society organization is crucial for promoting human rights, and we really appreciate your presence here. And thanks for Anselmo, because actually we contributed to the redaction of this report on the role of local government that was presented in the Human Rights Council in last September at Geneva, and we made a statement. So my idea is maybe to reflect this statement and the challenges. Just to say that the committee exists since 2005 within United Cities and Local Governments, that is a worldwide organization of local government, to promote this question of human rights, social inclusion, and participatory democracy, that are three key and very related, very linked elements to our view. But the movement of human rights cities, we are the result of a movement that was born before in 1988 1998, sorry, because in that time Barcelona mayor invited the mayors of Europe to have a commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the adoption of the European Convention for the Protection and Safeguarding of Human Rights. Then in 1998, these mayors from Europe decided to write their own charter, like the Charter of the Charter for the Protection and Safeguarding of Human Rights in the city. That charter was adopted today by 355 local governments. And then in 2005, they decided, those mayors, to integrate the municipalist movement worldwide so that they can promote human rights cities within this movement and not stay between convinced mayors that with the same political will. So we made a work of promotion of this localization of human rights. And we work in 2010 on the redaction of the Global Charter Agenda for Human Rights in the City, because this charter came to complement the European one, being more global, but also with an action plan and strong recommendation and suggestions so that human rights become local policies and being concrete. This is the work that we've done in 2010, and in 2011 this charter has been approved by the whole organization. And this is for us a victory because it was not easy. It was not easy to have this charter approved. It was not easy because the mayors saw that that was meaning new obligations for them. Yes, it's new obligations for mayor that has not that much legislated ruled into the national and international legislation that are not so precise, because when we speak about human rights, we often refer to the obligation of the states. But at the same time, we could invoke the fact that this charter is like an action plan to be shared at local level. It not means that you as a mayor you will be responsible of a result of human rights. No. This means that you will commit together with civil society and with other stakeholders to improve human rights and to govern with this objective of protecting, promoting and fulfilling human rights. That is a change in the way you govern your territory. That means a real change, because if a human rights approach in the local administration, that means setting the human at the center, at the core of the project. No, for instance, last week I was in Lisboa. That is also not recognized as a human rights city, but it is a human rights city because Lisboa has adopted a charter with its citizens to protect social rights in a context where it is being very difficult to access to housing, to access to social policies. So they designed a charter with their citizens. It is a Lisboa local charter. And so we had a session on social inclusion for migrants at city level with 10 cities, Mediterranean and European cities. And in Lyon, in France, there was this question of occupation of public space by migrants and some delinquents and some questions of problematic, like local problematic. And so we make a practical case because this session was about how to tackle the inclusion of migrants in the city. And there were two very strong approaches. The first one was security approach, and the other one was a social approach. And they were very contradictory. So when Lyon told us what they really did, they told us, okay, we try to have an urban resolution of the question. We try to change, to suppress the banks so that people cannot stay. We try to put police. They tried everything. But this place, this square, has 200 years of history of coming migrants. Usually they were coming from the other regions of France, and now they're coming from Maghreb and from Africa and from Eastern Europe, now the Roma people. And so they told us and they shared with us that this infrastructure, this urbanistic approach was not able to solution. Was not able to resolve the question. So human rights, I think, I wanted to mean that they have to use other methods, implementing a human rights approach with mediation, with people, and that is human rights approach. Human rights is about people more than infrastructure. I think this is a big question. What are the challenges? Two main principles to localize human rights and to make human rights cities. Real decentralization, and as you said, Anselmo, without local democracy we can have human rights. This is the reason why of local democracy, the rights. So actually it's very important that local government can have resources and competencies to promote and protect human rights. And this is one of the key issues. The second issue is the work with civil society. This is fundamental because when the 375 cities adopted the global charter for the human charter, now we have maybe active cities that implement this charter. We have maybe 10 or 15. Why? Because it was just a political will, and civil society was not really aware of that commitment, and so that's why in the global charter I would like this charter to influence maybe the principles. We suggest that this adoption of the charters at local level for human rights must be a process negotiated, discussed with civil society and social movement. This is very important because if not, this charter has stayed at the political level of some local governments that since that moment have changed it, and nobody is knowing about the binding effect because they don't have binding effect. Just maybe to make the link with the right to the city, because I know my time is finished, and I'm sorry. I will try to put the challenges in the discussion that we will have later. One of the challenges is austerity policies and the lack of resources. In the commitment for human rights means that all the necessary means and the available means in the international commitment says that all the available means that can be dedicated to human rights must be put to protect human rights. And no, the fiscal austerity is a big threat for human rights protection. So we have to work in this guiding principle on fiscality, on sharing resources and redistribution. The other main threat is the situation of migrants. If human rights is based on equal dignity of people, if administrative status prevent people from having rights, so we cannot say we are in a democracy. This is a big issue. So how, at local level, we can go beyond this question of administrative status and resolve the question of migrants' rights, because this is a big threat also. And the last one is that monitoring is also an issue. We have to find a way to monitor. As a local government organization, we cannot control the application. We cannot judge the members. Okay, just to say that human rights cities must achieve the right to the city as a new project for a urbanization sustainable, made with and by and for people. So that's just my conclusion. conclusion point that human rights cities must achieve the goal of the right to the city. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I think it's a time to exercise my power as a chairperson. We have so many people, we like to listen to the diverse opinions. So if you look at the page 9 of this paper, there's a guiding questions for all invited panelists. I want to remind you that there are three questions, but please focus on the second and third question. If you start talking about your experience and your development, it takes too much time. So the second is critical assessment of the WHRC's report. And third is what kind of actions are needed to implement recommendations. So please focus on those questions and please limit your presentations to 5 minutes. So after 3 minutes of your presentation, my assistant will show you a paper with 2 minutes left. Okay? So please understand me. Next, Jefferson Franilla from Japan. Yes, please.
Thank you. Good morning again, and I hope I'll be able to present things in 5 minutes, but I will definitely make sure I can do that. The title of my presentation is on the challenges and opportunities of Human Rights City, and I will just very, very quickly look into the situation in Japan, because I think they're pointing out a lot of lessons for us, at least in the case of one country. So as you can see, in Japan now you have many governments with ordinances, policies, and programs on or related to human rights. Take note of that, on or related to human rights. Some have institutions, offices, information centers, museums, again, on or related to human rights. And some have acted on current human rights issues. This is just to give you an incomplete survey that there are several initiatives going on in different places all over the country in relation to human rights or related to human rights. This is just to give you an example that in some cities they have developed institutions such as this ombudsperson in relation to child rights. That's there, already existing. Again, also, some cities have already established human rights centers, which are basically promotion of human rights centers. They do a lot of human rights education work. And one background that you have to know is that this happened because of the movement, of the anti-discrimination movement in Japan, the Burako Liberation Movement. Professor Kim would know more about this. Many years ago, they have been trying hard to get the governments, local governments, to enforce human rights, anti-discrimination, and so on. And so they were able to have these local governments establish these human rights promotion centers. As you can see, there are quite a number already existing. And there you are, another set. Now, the last three, including human rights also, however, the institution where I belong, is just an example of the problems of human rights support by local governments, because you can have a political problem of not anymore supporting human rights work. For example, that happens, for example, in the case of terrorism. Now, this is to give you an example of what a local human rights center looks like in terms of the website, which is existing up to now. All right, now, action and issues. There's this issue of hate speech against the non-Japanese in Japan, and you have so many cases that have been happening by some groups, rights groups, doing hate speech against mainly Koreans and Chinese and also other foreigners. So here you can see several actions taken by the local government. Also, there's quite a strong movement on gender equality and child rights, so you can see the involvement of academics and NGOs or NPOs in this case. Now, let me just look at the trends and challenges. What are the factors that affected the local governments? First, the ratification of international human rights instruments from child rights, women's rights, and so on provided an impetus on part of the local governments to do something about human rights. The World Conference, Beijing, for example, was very, very important for the women's groups. The United Nations Program on Human Rights Education, as also child-friendly cities of UNICEF, also created an impact. There are also local campaigns by women, by Burako people against discrimination, by persons with disabilities, creating impact. There were national programs, policies, or projects, again, on these different issues that created impact, as well as, of course, the NGOs providing very practical support on drafting ordinances or other programs on human rights. So you can see here, for example, one of the city plans that you can find where you have a mention of human rights, respecting human rights, and so on. Participation of foreign residents in society. Another plan from another city to build a convivial society. Again, there is some mention here of human rights. However, there are factors that are negatively affecting the human rights of local programs, including local opposition, local politics, and lack of resources. I think some of them have been mentioned earlier. Some of the ordinances do not mention human rights or child rights. Some do not penalize actions that abuse human rights. Local governments have been pressured to withdraw support by the national government to facilities that can support human rights. And again, there's a resistance on the idea of human rights and child rights among the general public and government officials. Other factors. The existence of different initiatives do not appear to be coordinated under one local government program plan, and thus therefore largely limited to specific sectors. They all go separate ways. They don't have a coordinated effort to do something in one area. Right. I just want to look at the HRC report. It's very comprehensive, but I still find that there are some things that need to be included and explained. And on 2 points, I find that there's a need to clarify and strengthen the link between the national and the local initiatives, and also clarify the link of the initiatives at the local level to form one cohesive master plan. Again, in relation to Japan, there are so many initiatives, you have to put them all together in order they get coordinated. And I just want to point out to several points that I would like to emphasize. On page 45, paragraph 45 of the declaration of the report of the Human Rights Council, there's a question of declaration of cities as being human rights cities, and I think that we also have to look into the issue of non-declaration by cities as human rights cities. For many reasons, probably lack of understanding of human rights city concept, lack of coordination of existing human rights related programs and services, political sensitivity, failure to maximize existing human rights policy and declarations, especially the national ones, and also withdrawal of support for human rights. Some cities have initiated something and they later on the political leadership changed, and therefore they withdraw from support. I'm almost done. Also, in terms of non-declaration, there's a negative view on human rights by the local government officials and also by the general public, and again, withdrawal of support. I also would like to look into the role of the educational institutions, and I think we have to look into the Kaohsiung experience in Taiwan, which is a very nice program on human rights in the city. And also we have to look at Indonesia's Pusham experience, university-based human rights centers, which are in the provinces, not in the central cities. And they're doing something for the local areas that they are located. And then, okay, let me just, then finally, I just want to also look into the business thing, that they do a lot of work in the local areas and do make a lot of impact, but the local government may not be able to address the problems brought about by the company operations. And I think there's a need to look into that in terms of how the local government can address these issues. And then finally, what do? I think we have to look into the example of the Ruggie framework on the business and human rights principles, because it provided a good example of how you develop the different areas of a particular issue in order to guide governments in implementing the idea of linking human rights to the city. So the same problem, same issue, I think, is happening in terms of the Human Rights Council report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the time conciseness. Next, I'd like to invite President Mugianto, please.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. First, I would like to thank the Kaohsiung Metropolitan City for inviting me and the other Indonesian delegate for this conference, and particularly to the Korean Human Rights Foundation, the United Nations Human Rights Council Advisory Committee, and ADN for organizing this forum. I would like to go directly to the guiding questions. The first, my organization in FIT in Indonesia has been working on in the promotion of human rights cities at least for the last 3 years. And we have been participating in the Human Rights Cities also for the last 3 years. This is part of our learning. And even in April this year, we also visited Barcelona Metropolitan City. We visited the City Hall to meet and to learn how Barcelona is developed into a city of rights. And actually in Indonesia, we are very happy that there is a very positive response from the government. Even the President Jokowi in December, in the Human Rights Day speech, mentioned and acknowledged the initiatives by the local government in the implementation of human rights, which is very positive for us. And there has been several local government initiating the development of human rights in their cities. And because in Indonesia we have 539 local government, and but we start from some local government who have a political willingness. On second is if there are local civil society who are willing to engage with the local government. So we use both strategies from the bottom and also from the bottom and also from the top. And we are very happy that there are positive response. That's why for this Human Rights Forum, there are 2 local governments, there are 2 mayors or 2 regions coming to Barcelona, and they are going to share in the session tomorrow on city policy and the day after on education policy and schools autonomy. So we are very happy that this expressed the willingness of local government to create human rights cities in their local government. And then on the question number 2, regarding the report by the Human Rights Council on local government and human rights, we are very happy and very thankful with this report because we have been able to utilize this report for our lobbying. And for example, is that finally, for example, President Joko Widodo in December made a statement about the human rights cities. The terminology of human rights cities is also coming from these activities and also from the report that we, this report of the Human Rights Council that we circulated. And we have also been using the report of the Human Rights Council in developing our guidelines. Because in Indonesia, we publish guidelines for human rights cities. But it's still in Indonesian language. So we are still translating this into English so that you can provide inputs for improvement. So this is going to be used by the mayor and also the regions in developing their government. And what is one point which we found very important with the report of the Human Rights Council is in the context that because when we are talking about human rights cities, it seems that it refers only to metropolitan cities. But when we are talking about Indonesia, majority are rural and suburban local government. And the report of the Human Rights Council on local government and human rights is more or less providing like a framework that it also cover that human rights cities we are talking about in Indonesia also cover local or rural local government. And in the last gathering questions, in Indonesia, we have been initiating lobbying the Indonesian government because we found that Indonesian government can play important role in the UN Human Rights Council. For example, in the process of adopting or developing a guidelines for human rights or local government and human rights in Human Rights Council, for example. But we are still in the process of meeting the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Law and Human Rights, who are the focal point in in promoting international instrument. And the other initiative that we are going to have is that because in Indonesia we have a yearly annual Human Rights Cities Conference, and we are going to have that from 30 of November until 2 of December this year in Indonesia. So we, inspired by the experience of Gwangju Metropolitan City, we are not going to have the conference in Jakarta organized by NGO, but this coming conference will be organized by the local government, whose region will present here and share the experience in 2 days. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to now invite Ms. Rose Trazano from Philippines.
Thank you very much, and I immediately envy Indonesia and this report on these initiatives in Indonesia. Well, in the Philippines, the Philippines is really very good on human rights. No? We are actually considered as model of human rights, especially in relation to legislations and international treaties. No? We ratified almost all human rights treaties, including the optional protocols including the optional protocol 2 of the civil rights on the penalty. And then we have numerous enabling national laws on human rights, including, of course, Compensation Act for victims of martial law. We have the anti-torture law, and we also have the international humanitarian law in the Philippines. And then, of course, we have the national mechanisms against gross violations. We are very proud that we have an NHRI, the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines, which was constitutionally created in 1987 and remains strong up to this day. They have a Class A accreditation status. And then we have a Presidential Human Rights Committee. We also have mechanisms, other institutions that we think these are really opportunities for creation of human rights localities. We have human rights offices and focal persons. I think it's only in the Philippines, I don't know where. You find human rights affairs offices, desks and officers within the military and the police at all levels in the Philippines. And then the United Nations Development Program actually developed this human rights-based approach to development planning. And maybe, I don't know if you have heard of this, but we are willing to share this with you because it's really very good toolkit. And then our NHRI has piloted the Human Rights Action Center and Rule of Law, which is really very important undertaking, very important project because it actually talk with the local government units, discuss with them, and develop a human rights awareness and culture in consultation with the local government unit. But this is still the pilot area, and only very few areas have been doing this. And we have more than 40,000 villages in the Philippines and 1,500 municipalities. So there's a lot of areas, but at least in barangays, in all the areas of the government, of course, the issues for human rights of women and children and people with disability are very popular. Most of the conventions and national laws regarding these sectors are easily adopted and implemented in the community. And then this is the joint memorandum circular between the NHRI and the Department of Interior Local Government is really a big opportunity because it already establishes or lay the ground for formation of human rights cities. And we are very proud to have a very dynamic and vibrant and strong civil society movements in the Philippines, especially of human rights. And we're adopting the Panther principle and lobbying the government to actually also do this. And last year, our alliance, PARA, started a partnership with League of Lady Municipal Mayors on building human rights localities. I think it's easier to talk with lady leaders, excuse the men. However, with all those great opportunities in the Philippines, we are now faced with grim realities. We have a new populist administration. President Rodrigo Roa Duterte's government is composed of the extreme left to the extreme right. These are all cabinet secretaries. And he promised to continue macroeconomic policies of the past administration, which was really a problem because it only enriched. Of course, we had very good growth rate by the country, but it never trickled down to the poor people. It only enriched the 40 billionaires in the Philippines, but not the more than 95% of the Filipinos. And our president, even during the company election, has intimidated the NHRI, the church, and human rights community. Anyway, you have it in the book. I just want to shock you for a while. Okay? In 6 to 8 days, we have 464 killings in the Philippines. This is after our new president was elected. So it's an average of 6.82 killings a day. So we never expected this really to happen. we are in shock and awe of this happening. We have a president who thinks that human rights defenders are actually siding with criminals, with rapists. And that we are no good. And that, of course, includes you, not only the Philippine HRDs. And we have a police chief who said he would kill drug lords or drug offenders if there's no camera around. So, our realizations, very painful realizations, was that the 30 years of EDSA people power did not realize its promises. The economic, social, and cultural conditions of the people remain the same. We have failed, the human rights community failed to translate human rights to common language that the Filipinos will understand. And it's really painful to hear that there are lots of threats right now among human rights defenders, even the church, threats coming from common people. And there is now an emerging culture of fear, retribution, vengeance, and death. And we know that impunity will continue. So what would be the response of the CSOs? The CHR, our Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines, should remain strong despite the verification. But for the CSOs, we revive the Citizens Council for Human Rights, and we would be advocating for rights-based governance and development, and all human rights for all. It's very good that most of our speakers have already made such good comments and critique on the UN role of LGUs. I agree with all of what was said, and I think we can further discuss it. But there is one critical weakness that I would like to raise. We really have very good documents, but always the problem is in its dissemination. The 2014 document was actually first time seen by our partner mayors in August 2015. So that's more than a year. And I think no other local government units have seen the documents. The government, the national government has not discussed it. Maybe only the permanent missions in the UN and our Department of Foreign Affairs really know that there is such document. So this is a challenge for all of us, no? And we're of course challenging the UN to be more aggressive in promoting this document. We have UN national teams, country teams in all our countries, but they are not disseminating this very important role. And I think this should be done side by side with all the comments and improvements that we can do. Okay. So finally, this is Max de Mesa's code. It's still our assertion. The future is in the hands of human rights defenders, and our conviction to continue with the program. And so may the force of human rights and HRDs be with us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. Now I'd like to invite Ms. Jyoti Sangare from WHRCF.
Thank you very much. I would also like to start by saying how honored and privileged I am to be in the metropolitan city of Gwangju, which is hosting one of their organizers, as well as to thank all of the organizers for, I think, what is, in my view, a really important meeting and an important discussion that we need to have. We started with Charlie laying out the landscape of the world today, which is, I'm sure you will agree with me, rather scary. We do see a retreat on rights. We do see a retreat on fundamental freedoms and all the gains that many of us have made as human rights advocates and human rights defenders globally. So in that context, what does it mean to have a conversation on moving forward on a human rights agenda? You know, we all belong to countries, but where we live is in our cities. And within the cities where we live is in our neighborhoods. And if those neighborhoods are not going to be empowering, if those neighborhoods are going to expel us, exclude us, then as human beings, how do we live with our dignity and our humanity? And I think those are some of the fundamental questions. So to engage with some of the issues that we really need to take forward. Let me start by saying that at the World Economic Forum last year in January, it was very clearly, the economic community, as you will agree with me, is almost always much more forward-looking than the human rights advocates are. We are constantly running behind issues, whereas the economists, the business community in particular is scoping the landscape for more profit in the 10 years or the 20 years ahead. So it was very clearly stated that the three significant and fundamental causes of wars and conflicts in the years ahead would be land, water, and housing, in that order. Land, water, and housing. And how then to deal with these sort of root causes, and how for them, the businesses, to reposition and rethink their strategies in that context. Now, bringing that, and they had very good assessments of that, so bringing that into the context of the city, because that's where we live. That's where land, water, and housing and the conflicts around these issues will be felt and will unpack. So I'm just going to signal a few critical issues that we need to take note of in the context of our discussion, ensuing discussion in the next few days. So to think of that, to think of the root causes of conflicts in cities. It's very good to be in the presence of representatives of cities which are thinking of human rights, which are thinking of realizing and implementing human rights at the ground level. But it's also very important for us to know that there have to be mechanisms in place. We cannot be relying on the good fortune of having some enlightened mayors who will take the agenda forward. And the moment those mayors and his team are gone or her team are gone, then we fall through the cracks. So my next question is, what mechanisms? And some have been already signaled, the charters, the guidelines, how do we entrench them and write them into a mechanism so that the mechanism remains even though people come and go. And that's one of my critical points here, not only in relation to cities and in relation to other human rights aspects, but certainly in relation to cities. A couple of challenges that loom ahead of us on this urban landscape. One is of the demographic dividends in parts of in Asia, in Africa, and certainly in Latin America. We have a burgeoning youth population, which is referred to as the demographic dividend. Now, the youth populations also pose before us massive challenges of jobs and livelihoods. And what is the city going to do, the future city, to ensure that this dividend, this demographic dividend, is well empowered to have solid, sustaining, sustainable jobs? Because without that, we will face all of the problems and the issues that we are already confronting today, be it of so-called fundamentalisms, extremisms, or criminality. Another major challenge that we are noticing today is what in human rights terms we refer to as zones of exceptionalism. Exceptionalism of human rights norms. For instance, let me unpack this a little further. These zones of exceptionalism are growing, and they would be, for instance, the borders between countries, where neither rule of law of the receiving of this country or that country applies. So the no man's land in between, where no rule of law applies, and exceptionalism happens, where that exceptionalism, the laws who are governing this land is the law enforcement, or militarization or securitization of these spaces. So the borders between countries is certainly that, but within cities, these zones of exceptionalism, which are amplified now, would be detention centers, would be the street dwellers, the homeless people, would be, for instance, sex workers and where they live, beggars and the poor, and certainly slums and shanties. The zones of exceptionalism where rule of law breaks down, where people who are considered at the edge or the fringe or off the fringe of society and do not have the power to enforce their rights are then being subjected to enormous securitization and militarization and are being picked up and become just invisible. And these are areas where human rights have become non-existent. So in a city, to identify those zones of exceptionalism and to particularly reach out to those spaces to ensure that what would it mean when we say maximum available resources have to be spent in the interest of rights. What does it mean when we say non-retrogression of rights, even in the context of austerity or shrinking resources? What does it mean when we talk about justiciability of particularly economic and social rights? What does progressive realization in the context of, say, right to education or right to health in a city? What are the benchmarks that we need to set and progressively realize what in the, what would universal education be when fully realized, what does that mean? What is meaningful participation? These things, these words and these principles we constantly use. What does it mean? And what is a methodology for meaningful participation? And lastly, two things that I need to signal here. One is substantive equality. When we talk about substantive equality, and when we say that it shouldn't just be equality in terms of opportunity, but from there we need to move to equality of outcome. It's not enough to on the 4th or the 5th floor to have a banquet and to tell everybody, everybody has the opportunity, just go up to the 5th floor and partake of this banquet. That becomes meaningless for a person in a wheelchair unless we also provide an elevator or an escalator or something for this person to go up. So we need to move from equality of opportunity to really in a city begin talking about equality of outcome. And the second thing is, in particular, what happens when we have competing rights? Yeah. So, for example, in France, the right to have a secular city might mean that for young girls who are wearing a veil, what has happened is they can't go to school unless they take that veil off. In some instances, we know this has happened. But that right is a competing right, because the right of this girl to education is competing with her right to freedom of expression and cultural expression. So, and there are many, many instances, particularly in relation to women, I can name a number of them, where young women in cities have been told they cannot be in pubs and bars beyond 10 o'clock. And there are several cities, in order to protect them from abuse and violence. But their right to mobility and their right to freedom from abuse are equal rights, and you cannot be grading them. So we need to move from a protectionist agenda, particularly in terms of women, and there are several other minority groups, to an agenda which is protecting the rights of all, and all rights. And I know my time is up, but I'm happy to unpack these further. But I think these are just signaling some of the very difficult issues and critical issues that we need to unpack.
Okay, thank you. Again, I'm very much concerned with time. I don't want to miss my lunch, so please limit 5 minutes. Next, I'd like to invite Morten Jarum. Morten, please.
Thank you very much, and also for me, warm thanks for the invitation to be here, and it's a great honor to be here in Gwangju. It's nice to be back in Korea and see old friends here. And I look forward to the discussions here over the coming days, which in many ways is sort of a new energizing area. It sort of reminds me when some of us gathered in the early 90s and talked about national human rights institutions. We didn't know what it was, where we're going, what should they do, how do we go about it, do we create an international network, and we all know how that went about. And the same with human rights and business. in the somewhat later 90s. Again, the same questions, is there something to it? And some of you made reference to the Rocky Principles as a framework that could be used in this context. So I think there's the same sort of excitement and the same sort of next level work in the human rights, which in a way come very natural. That we spend a number of years of creating the norms and the standards, the international mechanisms. Then we went into a 25-year period of actually bringing it to the national level, getting the laws in place in states, getting also the national institutional framework in place. And so there's a natural flow now to then take it really to where people live and where human rights in the end, if they, as Eleanor Roosevelt said, if they do not have meaning there, they have meaning nowhere. And I really think that is the essence of what we're here to discuss. When I look in Europe, if I take I have those European perspective and the Swedish perspective in this regard. I would say both in Sweden and at the European level, I think just a few drivers for the municipalities in this regard. I would point to 2 or 3 issues that are sort of coming across. One thing is coming back to Charlie's excellent, and thanks a lot for the presentations, the keynote presentations, but the whole issue of the populism. I think there's a deep frustration in many municipalities about the populistic agenda which is prevailing at the national level, simply because it makes life very difficult for municipalities which are confronted with the real problems of, let's say, different sorts, and where the laws, the rhetoric, the us and them dichotomies which are being created are not very conducive for the sort of cities that many mayors and city officials want to live in and want their citizens to live in. So I think that is one driver which should not be underestimated, and we need to address it. And therefore we also do have, in the fight against the populism, we do have the cities to a large extent with us. Then secondly, and intimately linked to that, and I don't need to dwell on that, is the inclusion agenda. I mean, the more inclusive society, just mentioned yours again. Then there's one element that hasn't been mentioned all that much, and is sort of going through the council, Human Rights Council paper, or maybe could be strengthened a bit, is the joint up. I mean, when I look at human rights violations and challenges in Europe, a lot of it could be solved by simply joining up the different institutions in a much more focused manner. And what I think about is from the EU level to the national level to the municipal level. If those different levels in our governance systems actually interacted in a more coherent way, in a more focused manner, then I think a lot of the challenges that we face could at least be moved forward. Then to wind up, I would say there's also another thing I miss coming back to the national institutions. I have seen the national institutions, is that I actually miss a reference to the work of national human rights institutions in the UN document. I think we need to get the national institutions in there. We made a survey in the Fundamental Rights Agency on the stakeholder survey on the strengths of national human rights institutions in Europe. And what came clearly across there, that those institutions that were perceived as the most visible, those who had the biggest impact, were those who were also present at the municipal level, where most of the national institutions are present in capitals and very often in inner city, nice offices, and do not reach out. But those who actually have outreach, and I think we need to strengthen that, of course, along the lines with also the link to the civil society institution. Finally, I promise that my last words, I would say the good news in all this, which I think is really good news, is that we will see, if we're successful in this, that there will be fewer lawyers involved in human rights work proportionally. I'm a lawyer myself. I think this is a great opportunity, coming back to what you said from the Philippines, that we have not been very good in translating human rights into the ordinary language. I think this is a unique opportunity to bring in city planners, social workers, and a lot of other professionals and ordinary people, so we can get many more nuances into the language of human rights. So there's still a space for the lawyers, but hopefully we can expand the group a lot. The University of Lund, that I'm now affiliated to with the Raoul Wallenberg Institute, we have created a multidisciplinary group from city planners to economists to health, etc., to assist us in the work that we're embarking upon with the Swedish cities and regions. I must say, I look very much forward to that collaboration. I think that would be an enormous source of inspiration. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for your great ideas. Now, I'd like to invite Mamadou Kantout. Is the right name? I'd like to invite you. I'm sorry, my pronunciation is wrong.
Thank you very much. I was not supposed to speak, but
you can just say
because I have a presentation in 1 hour in the plenary.
So give us 2 minutes, or 1 minute.
Okay. So, in Africa, when we speak about right of human rights, I think it is important to highlight 4 points. The first one, I think, is that human right is important. For human right, it is important to have a political right to participate to the agenda of development of population. So it is important for elected people to combine their ideas and to exchange this population for knowing what they want to do and for knowing what they want to implement and to do in the cities. The second point is about the economic rights in cities. Economic rights is to work, to have a situation, to have money and to have a job in cities so that they can take their own decision and their own right and their own economic power. The third point is social, what we can call social and cultural rights in cities. Social and cultural rights in cities are about what the population want to do, what they are supposed to do in cities and how are they doing it, and how local authorities are combining their ideas, and how are they working with the population to take these rights about social and cultural wills in the city. So these are the 4 points I want to highlight. But this afternoon I must have a presentation in the plenary, so I can explain about that.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, following the program, I'd like to invite the South Korean experts. First, Mr. Kang-Hyun-Soo, please.
예, 안녕하세요. 대한민국의 충청남도에서 온 강현수라고 합니다. 충청남도는 인구가 약 200만 정도 되는 대한민국의 광역자치단체입니다. 대한민국은 지방정부의 위계가 중앙정부 밑에 광역자치단체가 있고 그 밑에 다시 기초자치단체가 있는 이런 형태로 구성되어 있습니다. 사회자께서 말씀하신 그 2번째 주제에 대해서만 먼저 간단히 제 생각을 말씀드리도록 하겠습니다. 충청남도와 같이 도시와 농촌, 즉 도시와 비도시 지역이 같이 있는 그런 지방정부에서는 이 인권 도시라는 개념이 조금 좀 명료하지가 않습니다. 왜냐하면 비도시 지역이 포함되어 있기 때문이죠. 따라서 이 그 인권 도시 운동의 역사성과 도시에 대한 권리에 대한 그 학술적 흐름을 인정하면서도 비도시 지역을 어떻게 개념 속에 포함시킬까 하는 부분들이 상당히 그 중요한 이슈가 될 거라고 생각을 합니다. 저희 충청남도에서는 최근에 농촌에 사는, 농촌 지역에 사는 농민 인권이나 농촌과 도시를 함께 연계하는 먹거리 인권, 식품 안전과 관련된 부분들, 도시와 농촌의 그 상생할 수 있는 그 인권적 연결 포인트 등에 대해서 지금 고민을 하고 있습니다. 또 하나, 우리 그 가이드라인에서 중앙정부가 해야 될 일과 지방정부가 해야 될 일의 그 역할 부분에 대해서도 좀 더 명료한 이론적 근거가 있으면 좋겠습니다. 물론 전 세계 지방정부들의 역할이 각 나라마다 제도가 다 다르기 때문에 그것들을 어떻게 명료하게 할지는 매우 어려운 과제입니다만은 적어도 중앙정부 차원의 인권 가이드라인과 지방정부 차원의 인권 가이드라인이 필요하다고 생각합니다. 마지막으로 간단히 그동안 제 경험을 가지고 한 가지만 좀 말씀을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 앞에 토론장에서 말씀하신 것처럼 인권 언어를 보편적 언어로 풀어내는 것은 매우 중요하다고 생각을 합니다. 지금 저희 대한민국이나 지역사회에서 인권은 상당히 호응을 받고 있는 주제입니다만 동시에 또 비판도 많이 받고 있는 주제입니다. 특히 일반 주민들에게 가장 설득하기 어려운 영역이 범죄자들의 인권 문제를 다루는 데 있어서 상당히 일반 주민들의 반감이 많습니다. 이 부분에 대해서 사실 인권 전문가들이 일반인들이 이해하기가 매우 어렵죠. 피해자 인권과 범죄자 인권에 대한 그런 경중을 가리자는 것들이 이제 일반인들의 정서죠. 영어로 번역이 어떻게 번역을 할지 모르겠습니다만 한국 속담에 눈에는 눈, 이에는 이 이런 기본 관념이 있습니다. 대부분의 보편적인 보통 사람들이 그 정의, 그것이 이제 가장 바람직한 정의라고 생각을 합니다. 따라서 여기서 사실은 굉장히 많은 보통 사람들이 정치적인 혼란을 느끼는 거죠. 그래서 인터넷에 있는 댓글이나 여러 가지 보면은 마치 인권단체들이 피해자 인권보다 이 가해자 인권을 더 존중하는 것이 아니냐는 그런 여러 가지 오해들이 있습니다. 물론 이런 것들은 범죄자들을 다루는 경찰이나 국가기관들에게는 굉장히 유리한 어떤 논리가 될 수도 있죠. 그런 면에서 인권이 좀 더 보편적으로 지역사회에서, 시민사회에서 또 일반 주민들과 함께하기 위해서는 인권의 언어가 보다 좀 더 아래로 또 일반인들에게 좀 내려갈 수 있는 그런 다양한 슬로건과 구호 또 프로그램 등이 좀 필요하다고 생각을 합니다. 이것으로 마치겠습니다.
감사합니다. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. 정명선, Professor 정명선, please.
Thank you very much. It's been a long time, so we're still waiting for lunch. So I want to make a short my speech. Okay. I just want to summarize, with the UN Human Rights Council report about the challenges and kind of critics that we have to develop. So the Human Rights report said we have some kind of challenges based on the lack of political will and shortage in institutional capacity and lack of adequate coordination between central government and local government, and lack of human rights information requirements, and the non-recognition of role and contributions from civil society, and lastly, absence of human rights obligations in several parts. But I think we have the most important things, which is the Human Rights Council report missed, is the strength of, the stress on the human rights education, because human rights education is most important to improve their political will. Political will, not just political will, like human rights sensitivity or democracy sensitivity. So those kind of factors are very important to develop the human rights institution and local level and local government level also. So we are in the stage of the second stage of human rights education program by the UN. So by the UN human rights education program, on the local government side, we have to focus on the local government officers and local government, all the manpowers need to be educated in the name of human rights, right? So the human rights things can improve the human rights in the local government area, and even we should to spread out to the national level also. So I think UN human rights reports need to stress education, human rights education, more than that. Just say human rights education information requirements important. No, it's not enough. So human rights education to every impact of local government and national government is very, very important. And also, based on the guiding questions, what kind of actions we need to implement the recommendation? I want to say we need education also. So as one of formal discussion says, this kind of information which made by Human Rights Council, it doesn't spread out at local government level yet. So nobody knows. Local government officers don't know about what does Human Rights Council report say. So we need to that kind of education, also information. We need to send to the local level also. Okay, my time's up, so I don't know. Thank you.
김종석 교수님.
5분 동안 하겠습니다. 앞서 많은 분들이 지적을 제가 요약을 했었기 때문에 그것을 반복하지 않을 생각입니다. 한국의 경우에는 점심시간에 이웃 같이 대화를 통해서 이해하시는 게 좋겠다고 생각을 합니다. 한국은 굉장히 개발, 발전해가는 과정이 있습니다만 제일 중요한 것에 제가 느끼는 한 포인트는 하나 지적하고 싶은 것은 지역의 인권은 지역 민주주의가 발전하지 않으면 이루어지기 어렵다고 저는 생각을 합니다. 그래서 그 지방정부의 역할에 대한 관심들을 많이 가지고 있는데 그 지방정부가 제대로 세워지고 제대로 움직여 갈 수 있도록 지역 민주주의가 이루어지는 것이 중요하다고 생각을 합니다. 그 지역 민주주의가 이루어지기 위해서 앞서 발표하신 유럽에서 오신 분들, 또 미국에서 발표해 주신 분, 또 한국의 경우에, 아시아의 경우에 한결같이 지적하는 것이 주민 참여의 문제라고 생각을 합니다. 여러분들이 지적을 했기 때문에 반복하고 싶지 않습니다. 단지 언론에 관한 것에 관심을 좀 더 기울이면 좋겠다는 생각을 합니다. 언론의 발표. 그리고 주민들의 의사를 전달하는 의사통로를 발전시키는 것이 굉장히 중요한 한 요소라고 생각을 합니다. 아울러 지역의 인권제도가 제도화되기 위해서는 그것을 어느 하나의 방법을 찾는 것보다는 저 개인적인 생각으로는 다각적인 어프로치, 복합적인 어프로치가 필요하다고 생각을 합니다. 그 중에 앞서 지적하신 정 교수님 인권교육 강조하시고 또 인권 문화를 강조하고 그렇긴 하지만 또한 아울러 지자체의 역할, 시민사회단체의 역할 이런 것들이 굉장히 중요하다고 생각합니다. 이런 것들이 어느 하나가 중요하다기보다는 다각적인 어프로치를 통해서 복합적인 방법을 통해서 그것을 개선하는 것이 굉장히 중요하다고 생각합니다. 저는 점심시간을 위해서 점심시간에 더 많은 토론의 안경으로서 이 정도 제안하고자 합니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for your short, brief presentation. Now, next is 노현수 교수, please.
저는 UN 지방정부와 최종보고서에서 공고를 위한 필요한 조치가 뭐가 있을까 여러 가지 생각이 나는데 굉장히 많을 것 같은데 제가 몇 가지만 말씀드리도록 하겠습니다. 맨 먼저 해야 되는 게 모든 시간에 연대가 굉장히 중요하다고 생각이 듭니다. 그래서 인권 현안에 대해서 지방자치단체 간에 공공이 협력할 수 있는 그런 협력 체계를 마련하는 것. 그래서 이제 지방단체 간의 협력 체계를 구성하는 것도 굉장히 중요한데 지자체 간의 인권 관련되는 조직들이나 기구 간의 협력체를 구성하는 그리고 더 나아가서 국제인권기구나 그리고 해외 인권도시 간의 협력 체계를 구축해서 좀 더 이제 이러한 이제 협력 체계를 구성함으로 해서 공동되는 과제를 진정하고 해결하는 모색하고 그리고 인권 전반에 대한 의견을 교류하고 협력하는 방안 그리고 정보를 공유하는 이런 시스템이 마련되어야지만 우리가 지금 만든 최종보고서에 있는 공부를 이행하는 굉장히 큰 힘이 될 수 있을 거라 생각이 들고요. 그리고 두 번째로 우리가 이제 최종보고서 77항에 보면은 지방자치단체가 UPR에 참여하는 부분에 대해서 공부를 하고 있는데 이 부분을 더 이제 하나 더 나아가게 되면은 NLP가 있습니다. NLP에 이제 국가 인권정책 기본 계획이라고 할 수 있지만 NLP에 지방정부가 참여하는 방안도 한번 생각해 볼 수 있을 것 같습니다. 그러고 해서 지방자치단체가 인권 이행의 주체로서 그리고 인권 보장 책임자로서의 역할을 이렇게 확인하는 그런 자리도 될 수 있고 국가와 지방자치단체 간의 인권 정책이 좀 더 연계성을 가질 수 있는 그런 방안이 될 수 있을 거라 생각합니다. 그리고 우리 대한민국에서 지금 많은 지자체에서 인권정책 기본 계획을 수립하고는 있지만 이게 이행되지 않는 경우가 굉장히 많습니다. 그래서 이런 부분에 대해서 물론 지자체 내에서 인권위원회가 있어서 여기에 대한 객관적인 평가나 모니터링을 하지만 이건 아직 굉장히 많이 부족한 부분이 있다고 생각이 들어요. 그래서 국가인권위원회가 참여하고 해서 이게 제대로 이행되고 있는지 모니터링도 하고 거기에 대한 평가 시스템 한번 개발하고 해가지고 이거를 나중에 평가된 보고서를 주민들한테 직접 이제 공개를 하는 투명하게 공개를 함으로 해서 우리 지역에 있는 지방자치단체장이 어떻게 이걸 이행하고 있는지에 대한 평가를 받는 그런 이제 부분도 있어야 된다고 생각이 들고요. 그리고 끝으로 우리 지금 유엔 인권 지방정부와 인권 최종보고서에서도 그렇게 크게 다루지도 않고 우리 국내에서도 지자체에서 인권 실현 부분에 대해서 크게 다루지 않는 부분이 있는데 이게 뭐냐면 지방의회 부분이라고 생각됩니다. 한국의 북한에서 보게 되는 헌법상에도 그렇고 그리고 지방자치법상에 헌법기관이기도 하고 주민을 대표하고 그리고 모든 자치사무에 대해서 이제 의결 기관이기도 하고 자치입법권도 갖고 있고 그리고 단체장의 행정을 감시 통제하는 그런 지위도 갖고 있는데 이런 굉장히 막강한 지위를 갖고 있는 지방정부가 굉장히 지금 보면 굉장히 미미한 효과와 지위를 갖고 있는 것 같아요. 그리고 그 역할에 대해서도 크게 따지지 않는 이런 부분이 있는데 우리가 지방의회가 지방자치단체의 인권 증진을 보호하는 책무가 어떻게 보면 이게 제대로 이제 감시 통제가 제대로 이루어진다 그러면은 자치단체장이 좀 더 인권 실현에 인권도시를 만드는데 좀 더 많은 이제 압력이 가해질 수도 있을 거라 생각이고요. 그래서 구체적인 방안으로는 지방의회 내에 이제
지자체 인권 관련된 정책 사업들을 모니터링할 수 있는 소위원회를 구성하거나 아니면은 지방의회에 전무위원들을 두고 있는데 이 전무위원들 중에 인권 전문가들을 이제 채용하는 그런 방안도 생각해 볼 수 있을 거라 생각합니다. 감사합니다. 네, 감사합니다. 시간도 정확히 맞춰주시고 좋은 의견도 주시고 네, 감사합니다. The next I'd like to invite Shin Hyung-sik, please.
Thank you, Chair. To the guiding question, the first one, as you know, last year September, the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, which consist of 17 goals and 169 targets, have been adopted in the 70th UN Development Summit in New York. This year, May 30 to June 1st, the 66th UN NGO Conference was held under the theme Education for Global Citizenship, Achieving the Sustainable Developments Together in Gyeongju in South Korea. According to UNESCO, global citizenship education aims to empower learners to engage and assume active roles, both locally and globally, to face and resolve global challenges and ultimately to become proactive contributors to more just, peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, secure and sustainable world. Democracy, human rights, and peace have been understood as political or ideological in many countries in the world, although they are universally recognized values and concepts. It is important to promote democracy education, human rights education, and peace education together with the framework of global citizenship education. And the number 2 question, assessment of UN Human Rights Council report. You can see in the page 96, Article 28, promote the understanding of respect for human rights of all individuals and systematic basis human rights training for their elected representatives and administrative staffs. Considering Article 28, the human rights education and training in the local government should be implemented more actively and strongly. Finally, the guiding question number 3, recommendations. I recommend the 9 tasks of the human rights education and training in local government. The first, the building of human rights education and training center. Second, the creation of human rights education and training fund. Third, the research and development of human rights education and training programs which reflected the local characteristics. Fourth, the fostering of human rights education and training coordinator. Fifth, the enlargement of the educational financial independence rate. Sixth, the setup of the systematic linkage system of human rights education and training in local government. Seventh, the enactment of ordinance to revitalize supporting HR, human rights, education and training in local government. 8. The capacity building and the empowerment of CSOs in local government. Lastly, 9. The publishing and the distribution of human rights, education and training manuals. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. We now have about 10 minutes left. I'd like to ask and then Lee to wrap up. Before the two present, do you want to ask me? Okay, so you want to do it later, okay. I'm sorry I cannot open the floor today this time, but I believe we have a continued discussion afternoon. So if you have questions, you can do that at the time. So please, Charlie and Karen, please give us the final words. You can use the microphone.
Let me thank you for your time management that gave us 10 minutes at the end here. It's a difficult process to hurt us and keep us on time. I did want to mention that you might think from my comments that I have a very dark vision of the world, but I skipped from the challenges to some of what's going on in the United States, and I skipped over what I was writing. I encourage you to take a look at it, and some of the very positive trends, and one of them is the SDGs. I thank Mr. Chen for mentioning those. They are human rights framed. They're a huge step forward compared to the Millennium Development Goals. So in the United States right now, we have major cities. In fact, as we sit here, Baltimore is convening city officials, NGOs, and academics for the third time to set their goals for the SDGs and to set their targets and to agree on indicators. And this is happening in a number of major cities throughout the United States. I'm sure it's happening in other parts of the world. We also have two major coalitions now that represent 7,000 cities and 600 million people that have committed themselves to measurable, publicly observed standards for global warming. And these are just a small subset, of course, of the SDGs, but the fact that mayors are committing themselves to this, that they're going to be held accountable by citizens and by other cities, has got to be a very positive trend as well. And finally, in this month's issue, the July issue of Science magazine, it was reported that an area the size of India on the ozone hole over the Antarctic has closed. This is the largest reversal of human environmental impact that history has ever known. It is just a small step, but it should give us confidence that we can do something about global warming. And this was really the result of the effort in the late 1980s and early 1990s to get the Freon and other instruments out of the air that were causing the ozone to be depleted. So those are just some positive trends I wanted to mention since I skipped over them in my presentation.
Just in reaction to some of the things that have been shared today, I think, well, the one that calls my attention every time is really the language of human rights. I think that's somehow it's our failure as human rights defenders who have not been able to break down the language of human rights into local lingo or parlance. But more than that, I think the message of some that human rights becomes a barrier to governance, I think, is even a greater challenge for all of us. And we have to shatter this particular notion. The Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines has done this through what our colleague here from civil society has said on our human rights action centers and rule of law, at least in local government. But national human rights institutions are also placed in such a position that we have to challenge some of these actions by local government, and they have to understand that. Moving on, I think on SDGs, SDGs would be a common language, I think. And that's where we can anchor coordination of our efforts. And I remember an example in the previous Millennium Development Goals where in elections of local officials, the Millennium Development Goals became their platform, their campaign platform. And I think this is a similar thing that will happen in the SDGs as well. It has become a campaign platform also for some. But moving forward, I think not only a campaign platform, but also a basis for governance in local government. And this is one of the challenges, I think. It's the implementation at the local level. Aside from that, of course, the role of media is really very important because that has the multiplier effect. It creates public opinion, and much of what has been happening going against the trend of human rights and human rights cities are actually shaped by media and what it presents to the public. So I think an important stakeholder would also be media in that respect. That's all. Thank you.